Yo, what is up guys? It's Freddy Knows Ball back here with a brand new video. Today we're going over transitions and you're gonna love the ball knowledge I got for you guys today. It's going to be lit and yeah, let's get right into it. I don't have much more of an intro to give you guys. I am excited to dive into this, okay? Transitions is something that I used to struggle with a bit, but once I learned this ball knowledge and this strategy that I'm gonna teach you guys, it kind of became way less intimidating for me. And just practicing it kind of solidified like everything I need to know for it, you know? So let's get right into it. For transitions, you must understand the text. It's almost like the command of evidence questions or the long passages where you have to know what it's saying in order to find the correct answer choice, okay? And transitions is very similar, and we're going to see this as a recurring theme in the next couple of videos when it comes to these longer passages, because this is kind of the first time we're going into a part of the test where understanding the passage will make or break whether you get the question wrong. You know, for standard English conventions, you don't have to know what they're talking about. For rhetorical synthesis, it's like, yeah, you might need the notes for a couple, but usually not. You don't need to know what they're talking about either. And so this is the first time where we're going to need this
ball knowledge.
Guys, this is the first time we're talking about this, and I'm telling you, it is going to come up so much in reading and writing, all right? I don't care how you memorize this, but for transition questions, make sure before you look at the answers, have a guess of what the answer will be. Fill in the blank with your own word. And then when you look at the answers, see which answer most closely aligns with that word. The reasoning behind this is if you look at the answers first before coming up with your own word, they can mess you up and you might interpret the passage in a completely different way than it was intended. That's what's so powerful about this strategy, is that you're making the answer and then seeing which choice lines up with it. One more thing I want to note about transitions before we jump into practice, you have to be familiar with the transition words that College Board uses, okay? There's not a crazy amount of them. It's not like vocab where they can literally test you on the whole dictionary. I would say just becoming familiar with all the transition words they can test you on just by doing practice questions, or even just going into the practice questions to look at the words themselves and understanding what each one means, what each one signifies or indicates. That's really powerful, and that can definitely help you boost your score. So let's jump right into these practice questions, guys. All right, so for this first one, we see the question and it asks us for the most logical transition. If the question asks you that, you know it's a transition question, no doubt in your mind, okay? You see that question, you have to be like, boom, okay, transition. I need to make sure I have a guess before I look at the answer choices. That's what needs to be going through your brain when you're taking the SAT or practicing for it, all right? So let's read the passage and make sure we actually understand it. While studying Joro spiders, a large species originally from East Asia, University of Georgia researchers wondered if the spider's rapid spread throughout the southeastern U.S. was a result of aggressive behavior. Blank, they discovered the Joro spiders are gentle giants who react to even minor disturbances by freezing in place for an hour or more. All right, it's talking about how the researchers wondered if the spiders spread because of aggressive behavior. After the blank, it's talking about how Joro spiders are actually gentle giants, okay? Aggressive and gentle are pretty much antonyms, okay? So my guess for this would be something like however or by contrast, because it's saying, yeah, we thought it was because of aggressive behavior. However, these spiders are actually really gentle. So that's my guess. Let's look at the answer choices now. A says therefore, which doesn't have any correlation with any type of contrast, or it's not similar to however, so I'm crossing that out. B says instead, which while it's not perfect, it does align with it in a sense. So I'm gonna keep that, but let's see if one of my guesses actually pops out. C says for example. Now this definitely isn't an example, and we're definitely not contrasting with for example. So C is definitely wrong. D says in other words, and that basically just means that they're paraphrasing, but they're not. They're bringing in new information that the Joro spiders are actually gentle giants. And so instead is our strongest answer here. and we just pick that and move on. Here's the next question. Most logical transition, we know it's a transition question. Let's understand the text. Scientists were able to isolate a relatively pure sample of selenium in 1817, the same year they first discovered the element's existence. Blank, the isolation process took longer for molybdenum, which was isolated in its pure form 3 years after scientists first discovered it. So essentially this is saying selenium got isolated in 1 year. Molybdenum got isolated in a much longer time, 3 years. I'm kind of thinking that's a contrast, right? I'm saying, yeah, selenium took 1 year to isolate. However, molybdenum took way longer. Like, on the other hand, molybdenum took way longer. So yeah, I'm looking for a contrast once again. I'm looking for however, or maybe on the other hand. So let's read the answer choices. A says by contrast, and boom, that was my guess. So I'm picking A, but let's double check that the other three are not correct. B says thus, which basically just means therefore. And so since we know that there's some sort of contrast here or like a different perspective, we know thus can't be right. C says similarly, and this is definitely not similar. It's literally the opposite because one took a pretty short amount of time, 1 year, and the other took way longer, 3 years. And so since that's a drastic difference, similarly can't work here. D says for instance, which just means for example. And that's not an example, it's a whole different thought after the blank, so that can't be right. And so I'm choosing A here. Yo, what is up guys? Future Freddy here, and as promised, here is the shout out from last video. If you guys want a shout out, type into the comments, guess, and I'll shout you guys out in the next video, all right? I just wanted to say thank you guys again. Back to the video. All right, this is a harder question, guys. Let's go ahead and read it and try to understand. The prime meridian, the global indicator of 0 degrees longitude, established in 1884, was originally determined using astronomically derived coordinates. Blank, as decades passed, new calculations would reveal increasingly precise coordinates, yet the prime meridian remained unchanged. It wasn't until the 1980s that, spurred by improved geodetic data, the prime meridian was officially moved, roughly 100 meters east. All right, so check it out. We're talking about the prime meridian and that it was established in 1884, and the coordinates were derived astronomically, right? Then it says, as decades passed, the prime meridian remained unchanged, even though it would get more and more precise. So it's essentially saying, like, I would say maybe like additionally, or something that kind of just keeps it moving forward, right? We don't want to say a contrast because it's saying this was established, blank, this didn't get changed, right? It's kind of expanding. Then it says it wasn't until the 1980s that it was officially moved, but that's not really what we are trying to understand about the passage. We're trying to understand the relationship between the first sentence and the sentence that the blank is in. I would say additionally or moreover would be my guess. So let's look at the answer choices. A says specifically. Okay, the reason that this isn't right is because it's not specifying down. It's just kind of continuing the story. It's not going deeper into determining the coordinates in 1884. It's talking about stuff decades later, right? To that end, pretty much is just a cause and effect. And so this isn't really cause and effect. It's not because it was established in 1884, now they're not changing the coordinates. That's not how it works. It's just, it was established in 1884, the coordinates haven't changed, right? So B is definitely wrong. Again and again. All right, so this is kind of a weird one because it's pretty uncommon to see on the SAT, but it does actually make sense here. If you think about it, it does keep the flow of the passage moving. So let's try to actually use it in the sentence. The prime meridian was originally determined using these coordinates. Again and again, as decades passed, these calculations would get increasingly more precise, but the prime meridian would not change. That makes sense, right? Because it's like continuously decades would go by, but the prime meridian, the only thing that would happen it would get more accurate. It wouldn't change. So that's something that would fit there. Granted basically is like admittedly or although. It's like despite the coordinates getting established, they got more precise. That doesn't make sense. So we know D is wrong, and so whether you solved it by identifying that again and again is correct, or you solved it by deductive reasoning, seeing that A, B, and D have to be wrong. Whichever way works for you, that works, because as you can see, my guess, it didn't directly align, but I still ended up getting the right answer because I made sure the other three were wrong, and I tried C in the text to make sure that it works. All right, this is the last question for the day. If you guys want to try it on your own, feel free to pause the video. Just make sure my process, all right? So we see that this is a transition question, and now we have to make sure we understand the text. In her poetry collection, Thomas and Beulah, Rita Dove interweaves the characters' personal stories with broader historical narratives. She places Thomas's journey from the American South to the Midwest in the early 1900s within the larger context of the Great Migration. Blank, Dove sets events from Beulah's personal life against the backdrop of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. So, I'm looking at the text and I'm seeing that it says Dove interweaves the characters' personal stories with broader narratives, okay? So I'm looking at this sentence where it says she places Thomas's journey, which you can infer is a personal story, with the larger context of the Great Migration, which is a broader historical narrative. Then it says Dove sets events from Beulah's personal life, which is a personal story, against the backdrop of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, which is a broader historical narrative, right? Once you can infer that, you can see, hey, that's basically just talking about exactly what she was going into. So it's kind of expanding. So it's kind of just saying the same thing that Thomas's journey was, except with Beulah. So I'm thinking something like similarly. And as we can see, similarly is an answer choice, but let's go over the other three to really make sure that similarly is correct. Specifically does not work here because it's talking about Thomas's journey and then it talks about Beulah's journey. And so you can't say specifically since it's a completely different thought. Thus is basically just saying like therefore, and so you can't use thus because it's using Thomas as one example and it's using Beulah as another example. So it's not saying Thomas has this, therefore Beulah has this. That's not the relationship. So we know B is incorrect. Regardless is essentially saying, despite all of this stuff, this is still right, you know? And so that's not at all what we're doing here. We're just trying to explain the personal stories with the broader historical narratives. We're not trying to say, despite Thomas's journey with the Great Migration, Beulah's personal life was against the backdrop of the Civil Rights Movement. That's not what we're trying to say. We're trying to say the personal stories were with the broader historical narratives. Thomas had a personal story and a broader historical narrative. Beulah had a personal story and a broader historical narrative. And so that's why similarly makes the most sense there, because it's Thomas's story and narrative. Similarly, Beulah's story and narrative. If you guys had trouble understanding this, feel free to rewatch the video. I will also say that there is a YouTuber named James Liu who has a video on this. I'll go ahead and put his profile picture on the screen. I'm not acquainted with him in any way. I just wanted to say I thought his video was pretty informational, so I'm just giving him a free shout out, you know. Besides that though, that's all I have for you guys. Just try to practice a bunch of these and get familiar with the words that College Board actually uses. And sooner than later, you'll actually probably be guessing some of the questions before you even look at the answer choices like you guys saw me doing. Hopefully this helped you guys, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Peace.